What's up, YouTube? Scott here with the Carrera Cafe, and behind me is my 1985 Porsche 911 3.2 Carrera. I've had this vehicle for just about a year now, so I thought that'd be a great opportunity to kind of give you guys a behind-the-scenes look at air-cooled 911 ownership, both the good and the bad. If you're anything like myself, you really kind of contemplated buying one of these for a while, and maybe you still are. I know that I admired these for a very long time, but every time I got close to finally buying one, I just ended up with something different because I had a tough time justifying this car on paper. So today I'm going to kind of give you a behind-the-scenes look at air-cooled 911 ownership, the good and the bad. For those of you that might be on the fence about air-cooled 911 ownership, this video is designed to help decide if it's right for you. I feel like YouTube is full of a lot of great content about air-cooled 911s, but some of it is really the highlights. Maybe it's just the cinematic driving shots. I'm going to talk to you guys about what it's like to truly drive one of these cars. In the year that I've had this vehicle, I've put about 6,000 miles on it. This is not something that just sits in my garage. I am not some zillionaire YouTuber with a barn full of vehicles. This is a big financial purchase for me. And the goal of this video is for those out there that might be contemplating buying a $50, $60, $70, $80,000 sports car. Maybe it's a Corvette, maybe it's a BMW M2, maybe it's an Audi, or maybe you're already set on a 911, but just trying to decide if an air-cooled is the solution for you. Obviously, this video is going to be primarily about 3.2 ownership. I feel like the 930 turbos are just kind of out of reach for us average folks nowadays. I think you're going to spend six figures on a turbo now, unfortunately. So I think these cars are in the sweet spot in terms of reliability, cost, performance, and ownership. So with that, let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about is cost/value, right? So what should you expect to spend to not only acquire one of these air-cooled 911s, but also to own one and maintain it? So there's a couple things that you need to ask yourself when you are starting to shop for a 3.2 Carrera. And the first one is, what kind of vehicle are you after? Do you want a garage queen, a showroom quality restoration? Do you want kind of a driver's car, so one that's maybe got some miles on it and has been, thoroughly enjoyed? Or do you want to get a project car, right? I'm not going to speak to costs and ownership of a project car because that's just something I've not been exposed to in the air-cooled 911 market. But let's touch on what it would look like to acquire a driver's vehicle. When I was searching for mine, I really wanted a kind of a blend of driver / good enough condition that I could take to Cars and Coffee and be happy with it, which is what I ended up finding. So in your search, you're going to want to first ask yourself, do you want a Targa or do you want a coupe, right? Targa is the removable roof. Generally, Targas are slightly cheaper than coupes. In my experience, maybe 10 to 20% difference in value between a coupe and a Targa. The next thing that will impact the value of the vehicle is the transmission. So the earlier 3.2 Carreras will have the 915 gearbox. The later iterations of the 3.2 Carrera will have what's known as the G50 transmission. Now, on paper, the G50s tend to bring a higher price tag, more value. I think it's probably more widely accepted that the G50 is a better transmission, but I do think that it's biased. You should go out and drive both and see what you like the most. I have an 85, so mine has a 915 gearbox. I've driven 930 turbos that have a 915 gearbox, and I would tell you the shifting experience, the action is all predicated on how it's been maintained and what its life looks like. So not all 915s are the same. I think what you'll find is 915s wear over time, when a G50 kind of maintains its same shifting action and then mechanically just falls apart at some point. Not saying it happens sooner or later than the other, but I think because of that, the 915 has a bad rep because you might have gotten in one that's only got half of its life left and it seems like a challenge to drive. I actually prefer the 915 because when I'm in this car, I want to do nothing but think about driving it, and the 915, in my opinion, requires a little bit more attention. The next thing that will probably impact the cost to get into one of these is paint. So is it original paint? Is it a repaint? And if it's a repaint, is it a color change or is it a respray of the same color? I would say that original paint in great shape is going to be your most expensive. Professionally done glass out respray of the same color would be second. And then third would be a color change that maybe isn't done that well. You know, I've seen a lot of color change 911s that once you start to look at the engine bay and the door jambs, you realize it's not all the same color, right? So after you've decided on all those factors, the last and most important is how much history do you want with the vehicle, because that's probably what's going to impact it the most. Those other things that I've just mentioned are probably going to impact the price 10 to 20%, but ownership history is going to be the biggest factor in my opinion. You know, how many owners and how much documentation does the vehicle have? The good news is these 911s actually are very reliable, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, these are enthusiast sports cars that we're still comfortable beating up. So getting one without documentation isn't the end of the world, but you're going to need to budget for unforeseen maintenance and potential repairs. When I was searching, I wanted a good blend, like I said, of driver and kind of showroom condition. So I've got a little bit of each. My vehicle in particular, I've got about 400 pages of maintenance history, and I'm the third owner. Now, I have the original engine, original transmission, just lots of maintenance to back it up. So let's get into the final kind of cost range. I think you're going to spend anywhere from $45,000 US to, on the high end, $90,000 US for a 3.2 Carrera, and that's, I know it's a big range, but it's heavily predicated on coupe versus Targa, 915 versus G50, and maintenance. You know, if you're interested in a early generation Targa that's maybe had a color change and doesn't have the original wheels anymore, I definitely think you can get one for the mid 40s. And I would argue that you're going to get the same driving experience that I'm getting right here. But if you're looking for showroom condition, later generation, G50, lots of maintenance, one or two owners, I bet you are going to be more in that $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 range. And that's current market. I always kick myself because I should have bought one of these 5 years ago. All of these air-cooled 911s really have doubled in price. So now that's initial kind of purchase costs, but let's talk about ownership, because this is where I think things get a little surprising. So one of the things here in the United States, specifically in Missouri where I live, is property tax. This car is very low on property tax. It's probably 25% of what I would pay on my other more modern vehicles. The government does not put a high value on air-cooled 911s. So taxes from a property tax perspective were actually pretty reasonable on this car. Sales tax is obviously going to be predicated on the price of the vehicle you purchase, but property tax is low. And the other thing that surprised me was insurance costs. And I had this vehicle appraised, and it insures for more than what it appraised for. If I was going to only drive this car 2,000 or 3,000 miles or less a year, the insurance was like $50 a month for $100,000 in coverage through my State Farm agent. Now, I wanted to be able to drive the car more than that, so my insurance is actually about $80 or $90 a month. But again, I'm 31 years old. This is a $100,000 car. To put that in perspective, I've had BMW M5s, Cayenne turbos. The insurance on those are $250 to $300 a month. So the insurance on this vehicle is far, far less. I assume they attribute it to people that own these cars, maybe aren't going to drive them that much. The ones that do drive them are probably pretty defensive drivers, you know. So insurance rates are pretty cheap. Last kind of cost of ownership is just maintenance. These cars are pretty simple. If you're somebody that likes to tinker, you know, you can certainly wrench on these yourself, but let's assume that's not you. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm one of those guys where I might tinker every once in a while, but then there are other times I've put value on what it would cost for me to do the work, assume I break something, and then after I add that up, I'm having an indie shop do it. But if you've got a good air-cooled indie shop around you, I'll share some of my recent expense costs in the description, but it has not been very atrocious at all. I don't think this is that much more expensive to maintain than a German car from the 90s or early 2000s. I would argue it almost might be cheaper in some sense, because I'm not replacing plastic water pumps and high-pressure fuel pumps and turbo wastegates and expensive brake pads and rotors. I mean, I did a brake job on this car, and you can go get OEM rotors and pads for like $100 an axle. You can't do that with a modern sports car. So I think you'd be surprised by the maintenance costs of this, with a few exceptions. Certainly, if you're going to do some engine out maintenance, it's going to cost you, a lot of money. But because these are pretty reliable, you shouldn't hopefully find yourself in one of those situations. So that's kind of the value side of things. And for the longest time, I was comparing these cars to other $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 sports cars at 0 to 60 times, horsepower, technology and conveniences. And if you do that, you'll never buy one of these. You need to go drive one and decide what's important to you from a value perspective, right? I've owned a lot of other cars in this price point, cars that will drive circles around these things and half the 0 to 60 speed, but none of them have brought me this much enjoyment. So I would encourage you, if you're at a point in your life where you can sacrifice some of those other things and you've got another vehicle, that consider one of these, even if it's hard from a value perspective, right? So the next thing I want to talk about is realistic ownership of this vehicle for somebody who's going to drive it, right? You got to ask yourself, when you're buying one of these, or if you're considering buying one of these, when do you plan to use the vehicle, right? I tend to mix this car into my daily life. If it's a nice day, I'll drive it to the office and maybe run a couple errands. And I certainly go out for drives where my only purpose is the drive, right? And depending on your answer to that, it's going to depend on whether or not the vehicle makes sense for you, right? I see people on YouTube who daily these, and and I really appreciate people that do that. But I feel like YouTube can kind of show some of the highlight reels sometimes, and not necessarily what real ownership would be like. I personally would have a challenge daily driving this car, and let's talk about a few reasons why. The first is risk, right? I live in Missouri. I personally think we don't rank very high on the caliber of driving skills in Missouri, so I'm worried about somebody else texting or on TikTok while they're driving and damaging my vehicle, right? So there's a level of risk involved when I'm behind this vehicle. And you got to decide if it's worth it to you, because if this car was in an accident, it would probably never be the same, at least to me. So there's an element of risk involved with driving this vehicle. I really don't want to sit in stop-go traffic on a major highway. So because of that, this thing's never going to be a daily driver for me. Now, early morning Saturday cruise, not worried about it at all, right? The second thing, and this is just me being an over-analyzing or anxious person, but there's a level of kind of anxiousness I have when I'm driving this car and when the day is not about the car, right? What I mean by that is I'm just sitting at a stoplight on a 100-degree day, and I'm worried. I'm looking at the oil temp. Is that hot? Or maybe the car's sounding kind of funny, or it's idling a little low. There's kind of this, mechanical anxiety that I get with these vehicles. When I'm on a spirited drive, and I'm not even thinking about that. But if it's a Tuesday afternoon and I'm driving to work and I'm sitting at a stoplight, and you know, I'm just worried about those things. So there's a level of anxiety that I have when I'm driving this car. Again, unless it's one of those days where I'm just out to drive, right? If I'm going on a nice cruise and I'm enjoying the corners like this, so you have to ask yourself if you're going to be okay with that, right? One of the other kind of just silly things that you have to consider is what's the climate like where you live, right? I've had my AC serviced in this. My AC does work. It actually blows cold. My heat blows hot, but it's still not modern climate control. If you're somewhere where it gets above 80, 90 degrees, you're gonna then again ask yourself, are you gonna be okay with daily driving a vehicle that doesn't have that great of air conditioning, assuming it works at all? A lot of these 3.2s that I've seen that are on the lower price end have had the air conditioning system removed, at least components of it, because it's just that worthless and it takes away some of the vehicle's power. So just some things to consider. Now, if this is going to be purely a weekend cruiser for you, then those are all things that you'd probably expect with an older sports car. And they almost become, you know, kind of character at that point, right? So let's talk about some of the good things on a weekend drive. One is this is a great way for me to disconnect. You know, we're also heavily connected with our smartphones and work and social media. This car requires my full attention. When I get out and drive this thing, I think about nothing other than this sound and hitting that shift as best as I can. Do a little bit of driving real quick here. This right here is why you buy it, right? This is the weekend. The other thing that you think about on a weekend category, and this is going to sound cheesy, but it's the street cred, right? This is probably, in my opinion, one of the most widely accepted and appreciated sports cars. I am blown away at the level of attention this vehicle gets. I've driven Aston Martins, I've driven very expensive modern Porsches, BMWs, Audis, loud cars, fast cars, crazy colors. An old air-cooled 911 is genuinely accepted by everybody. I get thumbs up from people on street bikes, lifted pickup trucks, other German cars, Japanese cars. Everybody knows that this is the pinnacle of automotive engineering. If you don't have any friends and you want to make some car friends, buy one of these, go to the gas station, go to your local Cars and Coffee, you're going to make some friends. And just this driving performance is it's so great. It's so exciting. Sorry, I got shit sliding around behind me. The driving experience is like no other. It just doesn't get any better than this and connected. So let's kind of summarize and talk about what makes this car so great for a weekend slot, okay? I am at a point in my life where I would rather drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow. And I cannot take credit for making that statement. It's been said many times here on YouTube, but that is true here. In the last 18 months or so, I owned a 2021 BMW M5, which was about 550 horsepower. It was all-wheel drive. It was extremely fast, but it was idiot-proof. If traction control was on, you'd be hard-pressed to really require any skill when driving that vehicle. You could be wide open in a corner, and the car is going to do what it's supposed to do. And it's really exciting. It's crazy that technology has come that far, but I just don't necessarily care to do that anymore. You know, I'm at a point where I want to start growing my family, and you know, I don't need to be in a sports car that's that serious anymore. I have more fun between 30 and 60 miles an hour in this 911 than I do in any other car, and that's right here in the corners. The other reason you buy it's for the sound. I mean, the flat six symphony going on back here is just like no other. If you've been following on the channel, you'll know that I did the Fab Speed bypass for a while. I went back to my factory exhaust for a while. This is the Dankst Sport muffler, which I just put on recently. Oh man, that sound. And then, I'm a kicker for this, but I like the smell. You get in this thing and you feel like you're, you know, just wrapped in an old leather jacket. And you get out of this car smelling like you've been driving something cool. Because you do. You get out kind of smelling like muscle car, right? So, let's talk about who I think this vehicle is a fit for, okay? If you're at a point in your life like I am where you're kind of tired of technology and people that talk about how fast their car goes 0 to 60, right? Because everything's fast now. This car is slow by modern standards. And you're looking for something that requires a little bit more attention. There's a little bit of drama involved, and it makes you feel like you're really doing something, right? Then this is a car for you. If you've been hopping from sports car to sports car like I have, I probably, out of the 40 cars I've owned in the last 10 years, I would say 20 of them are probably sports car focused, maybe more, and I never keep them. Because I always find something I don't like, or I find something slightly better, or I'm watching the value of it depreciate. And it's been a year since I've had this, and I have not considered selling it once, which is rare for me. And it's because I'm just content. I'm not worried about the value, because if anything, these are holding or going up, and it doesn't get any better than this in terms of just sheer driving excitement. You know, if you're somebody who's, only got the room to have one vehicle, this isn't for you. If you're somebody who isn't willing to learn and listen to the car and be okay with some occasional quirks and weirdness, probably not for you. But if you're contemplating it, I encourage you to go out and drive some. For the longest time, I looked at these things on the internet for 4 or 5 years, and it was always just based on the price, the performance, and I always talked myself out of it, and it was something else. Because at the end of the day, you could go buy a brand new BMW M2, which you can get in a 6-speed transmission, or maybe it's a 7-speed, I don't remember, which is crazy to think in a brand new car because so many automatics are becoming common, for the same price as this. This is a 40-plus-year-old Porsche with 100,000 miles and no warranty left, and it potentially will cost you more than a brand new sports car. But what you get is an asset. It's something they don't make anymore. It's so much more unique and, in my opinion, more exciting than a modern sports car. So if you're just tired of technology and you've been bouncing from car to car, give one of these a shot. I think once you get to know the community as well, you'll just find that it's full of a bunch of really great people, not only here on YouTube, but in person too. Join the PCA, join some car clubs, and go out and get to know your car. So with that said, let's just do a little bit of ripping here in the hills. go, guys. I think that's going to sum it up for today. I hope this helps you in your 911 buying process. You know, like I mentioned earlier, I've been contemplating and admiring these air-cooled 911s from a distance for a very long time. I remember 5-6 years ago when this was a $30,000 car for a pretty clean and sorted example. I was like, oh man, that's just so much money. You could go buy an E46 M3 that's, you know, a 6-speed manual, and it could have been the competition, like the peak M3 back then, and I should have bought one of these instead. I would have kept it, and I would have owned it for about half of what this thing's worth in cost now. I certainly don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell you what the future of the air-cooled market holds, but there are certainly signs that we're getting tired of technology, right? And I talked about this in my other Lexus video because I recently purchased an LX570 because of how analog it is for a daily driver. And that's why I think people are going to be just reaching for these old 911s. People don't want their cars driving for them if you're an enthusiast. I get that a ZF or PDK can shift faster than I can, and a Tesla can do 0 to 60 far faster than I'll ever be able to do in this car. But none of them are this connected and driver focused. I feel like I'm actually a part of the process in this vehicle, and it brings me a lot of enjoyment. I forget about the busy world around me when I'm behind this car, and that's important to me, because although I use this for A to B transportation, a lot of times I'm driving just to drive. And if that's you, then I highly recommend that you check one of these out. Thanks again for joining, and I really appreciate all the support you guys have given me on the channel. We did hit 1,000 subscribers this week, which is a pretty cool milestone. This is a hobby for me, and I just enjoy bringing content to other Porsche enthusiasts, so thanks for coming along for the ride.